Welcome to From Combat Boots to Business Suits, the podcast brought to you by the Officers Association Scotland. And we are kicking off season 2 with a bang. I am delighted to have our first guest for this season. It is Susie Hamilton, the Scottish Veterans Commissioner. Welcome to the show, Susie.
Good morning.
Now, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. We're actually in the wonderful Victoria Quay in your office, which we've spent quite a long time rearranging this morning to prepare for the interview. But the reason we wanted to have you on the show is you are soon to be leaving post as Scottish Veterans Commissioner, and we thought what better way to round off a fabulous 3.5 years than to talk about the work that you've done and your own military career as a veteran. So shall we get into it?
Yes, of course.
Starting off, we will kind of start off at the beginning before we come to your work that you've done here with the Scottish Government. What made you want to join the military? How old were you when you signed on? And tell us a little bit about your military career.
So I applied to join the Navy. I think I was still 17 because my parents had to countersign the application, and joined when I was 18. I'd been in the cadets at school, actually, in the Army cadets. And I was interested in a career that wasn't going to be indoors, I suppose, in an office or a lab. I was interested in science and engineering, but I wanted something that was going to be a bit more different, a bit more exciting. So that's really what led me to applying to join the Navy as an engineer officer.
Amazing. And did you have to, if you were joining as an engineer officer, what's that process like? Did you also have to study at the same time, or was that part of the military training that you received?
Yes, I mean, it's different now, but back in the olden days when I joined up, the Navy had its own engineering college in Plymouth. So I joined, did my officer training, and then as a sub-lieutenant went to the Royal Naval Engineering College in Manadon in Plymouth and did a Bachelor of Engineering there. And then there's postgraduate study as well, and also training at sea, practical training before taking up my first post.
And were your family surprised that was the route you decided to go down as a career?
I think they were a little bit surprised because because I've been in the Army cadets. I don't know whether they thought I was going to join the Army, but also I'd studied quite a varied academic background, so I could have gone into other sciences or even totally different subjects. So possibly a little bit surprised, yeah.
So once you'd done your study, postgraduate study, did those kind of flow straight into each other, or were you doing other things in between?
Yeah, so the naval training is a combination of practical and the kind of what we call application courses. So I went to sea, so after my degree, came back, did some application course, went back to sea, and then came back again and finished off. And then that was me qualified for my first complement job.
Fantastic. And so how long did you serve for, and what were the sort of career highlights that you had?
So in total it was 17 years. I guess some of the highlights were being at sea, because that really is challenging, but it's it's an incredible environment to be working in, and you work very closely with your shipmates. There's nothing that really I've ever found to replicate that really close working environment. The people that you live with, eat with, go ashore with, and work with all at the same time. So that's a real highlight. And there was a bit of travel involved with that as well. I also spent 2.5 years as a recruiting officer back here in Scotland, and I found that really rewarding as well. So meeting a lot of young people who were interested in joining the Royal Navy, Royal Marines, and trying to persuade them that was the career path that they wanted, and supporting them into making that decision. So that was a very rewarding part of my career as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to picture what it must be like when you're at sea. That close. I worked on cruise ships for a while, so I've got a little bit of an idea of the sort of camaraderie that comes from, being in the mess and in all the sort of world that happens below deck. But we had a lot of guests that were in quite luxury circumstances above us. But did you make friends for life amongst people that you served with?
Yes, it's funny. You make it's very close and intense working relationships when you're at sea. Sometimes you don't keep in touch with those people, and that's just the way it is. I think you can't keep in touch with everybody because there's so many. There's so many. I've literally worked with hundreds of people at sea. I do have friends for life in the Navy, and some from training, some from sort of day one of basic training, and others who I've worked with at different parts of my career. but it's certainly, if I ever meet any of my former shipmates, and I met one 2 weeks ago when I was on a trip to the Highlands, and someone was in a veterans breakfast club, and so there's immediate reconnection there when you do meet them.
Yeah, and you worked as a recruitment officer for 2 years. What would you say to any young person that is coming up, about to leave school, and is considering joining the Navy? Is it still something you'd say you should absolutely go for it, and why?
Yes, I think it's still, there's a fantastic career to be had right across the military, actually. The training opportunities are probably second to none, and the MODs work quite hard on making sure that there's qualifications, attached to every training course now, better than it used to be. So, and in terms of personal development, I don't think there's really any other career that can that is good at bringing out people's personal development, allowing them to develop their skills, and also providing them with opportunities in things like, I know I'm starting to sound like a recruiting officer again, but they genuinely are things like sporting opportunities, opportunities to do some really quite unusual jobs that both that stretch and test you, but also really develop your character. So I certainly would recommend it still.
Yeah. And so you had a 17-year career, and we were having a bit of a pre-chat, and you had mentioned to me that you were medically discharged. Is it okay if we talk about that a little bit, and what that was like for you, the circumstances, and what that meant for your transition out of the military?
Yeah, so it is difficult circumstances for people, and for me it was. So I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, which is generally considered to be incompatible with service life. So that does quite usually lead to discharge. So to have the career that you've been working on really hard since you're 18 to suddenly to be vanishing into the mist, that takes a lot of lots of getting used to. I was very lucky that having a supportive partner and my family, and being at that point a chartered engineer, I had somewhere to live. I had my own flat, so I had lots of things in place already that were going to be there to support me, and that's not the case for everybody who is medically discharged. The actual resettlement part of it, I would say, was not great then, and I got very little because the time period is much shorter than you would normally have. So from my medical board to leaving, that was 3 months. So I did a business diploma course because it was about the only thing that I could get fitted in, really. That's changed completely. So there's much better support now. There's specific support for people being medically discharged, but also pre that point, for people who are medically downgraded, there's a lot better support. So in my case, I was medically downgraded and I had to leave the ship I was on right away because I was no longer fit to be at sea. And at that point I was the head of the department, so I was in my kind of the top job really as a marine engineer officer, and none of that was, the management of that wasn't particularly good at that time. It was very much, well, you're just kind of pushed aside, really. That's not the same now, and I'm really glad to see there have been a lot of changes there. So there's a lot of adjustment to be made, but as I say, I was lucky being an engineer. I got an engineering job when I left in Edinburgh. I have to say, turned out to be not really the right job for me, so it wasn't a great fit for me, and that's also not unusual when people first leave. But at least I did have employment to go into, and at the same time, when I was on terminal leave, I started volunteering with the Scottish Veterans Residences, which is a military charity that supports homeless veterans. And I was doing some volunteering with the fundraising and marketing manager at the time. And she decided to leave, and she knew I was fairly unhappy in my engineering job. She encouraged me to apply for her post, which I was very lucky to get. So I moved. It was a big career change, moving from engineering to fundraising and marketing in a charity, for which I didn't have really any qualifications. However, it was a great environment for me. That was a much better environment for me, and a really good team there. And it was a much better fit all round, and I was much happier there. So I stayed there for 14 years.
Wow. Okay, 14 years.
Yeah.
Goodness me. That's quite an incredible transition. And I think one of the things that we're always talking about at the Officers Association Scotland is is networking and really honing those relationships that you had. And that's a great example of being able to switch into something completely different through that contact that you'd had and building up that rapport and being encouraged to apply for the role. Just to rewind those 14 years back to when you were first encouraged to apply for that role. I mean, what did you think? Obviously, you had felt like you transitioned obviously quicker than you'd expected. Had gone down the engineering route because that's kind of what you knew. Yeah. When you took that first job out of the military, as in still remaining within engineering, what was it about engineering in a civilian capacity that didn't quite sit as well with you as it had when you had been in the Navy?
I think it was partly because it was a design manager role that I took up, which was managing design engineers who were based in Edinburgh for ships that were being built in, majority being built in Korea and some in Japan. So there was a disconnect between the kind of the operations and the hands-on, and it was very much, it was all based on kind of paper and digital design. But also there was definitely a cultural issue in terms of sort of culture and values. Mm-hmm. And I only now know how important it is to make sure you're working in an organisation that shares your culture and values. And I think this company, part of the oil and gas industry, and I think the oil and gas industry probably has come forward a bit, but certainly does have. There are some cultural issues mm-hmm. still existing there, and so that wasn't a very good fit for me. And it just wasn't the right fit for me, really. Mm-hmm. So although it was, as a chartered engineer, there were lots of opportunities, and I could have gone into a defence role, and I decided not to. And looking back now, 20 odd years later, I think maybe I should have gone into a defence role. But I wanted at the time I thought, no, I want to change. I want to get away from defence mm-hmm. and go into something that's a bit more civilian in oil and gas. So I mean, there are other factors. Obviously, I was also not very well because of
sure.
I could have been diagnosed with an incurable illness. So there were other factors, and the fact it was in Edinburgh as well was helpful for me. But it was. I think I would say to resettlement's a difficult time for everyone. Transition is a difficult time for everyone because we're all dealing with culture change and a bit of culture shock, I have to say. Regardless of how long you've served, there is a big difference between service life and civilian life, and that's something that it can be a rocky time for everyone. And I think, and if you're not really feeling comfortable in the job you're in, that just makes it even more kind of uncomfortable and difficult. So. The volunteering, I'm a massive fan of volunteering. So the volunteering I was doing was a real kind of lifeline for me that, I enjoyed that part of my world at the time. And I enjoyed just getting into doing something that just made me a lot more, I just found a lot more rewarding. And that was also really helpful in terms of eventually moving into the career I wanted.
Because that's interesting, because volunteering is something that comes up with us as well. And I think a lot of clients feel a little bit of fear towards giving, especially during that important transition time, is to kind of giving their time for free. But I suppose what you were saying about the first job that you had gone into not quite fitting culture-wise and values-wise, which is something that, again, a lot of service leavers will leave. They will go into a job, but it's only a couple of years down the line into their transition that they go, well, okay, I got that first job, I got my salary, but what is actually going to get me up out of bed in the morning again and make me tick for my next career? And volunteering is a way of toe dipping and making new connections and trying something different and giving something back.
It is, and it's also a way of adding more to your life if you are missing those elements of service, I guess, that were part of a military career, which might not be part of your 9 to 5. It's a way of putting that back into your life and maybe giving that bit of added value that you don't have, and therefore making life a bit more bearable if it's if you don't think you're in the right jobs. I think so. Volunteering is just as important for the volunteers it is for the organisation you're volunteering for. I think, I'm a massive fan of it, and I think, particularly for for service leavers and veterans. I think you can get more of the bits that you might miss of military life by volunteering, and not necessarily you're not necessarily always going to get it from your working life.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And actually, for anyone that may happen to be listening to this that isn't a service leaver or veteran themselves, I think that's probably true of everyone. That not all of us are going to find in our 9-to-5s, that real thing that's going to nourish your soul, and finding it elsewhere. And volunteer work is a great way of getting involved and learning new skills, meeting new people, and giving something back. So yeah, anyone that isn't a service leaver that happens to be watching this podcast, have a think about it. But yeah, that I hear what you're saying about it being a way of injecting some of those things that you might miss from service life back into your civilian life. So I think that's wonderful. So let's talk about then you moved into marketing and sorry, not just marketing. What was your full title?
It was fundraising, marketing, and communications. Actually.
Yes. So you've moved into this. What was that like then? That was, I guess, a real big career shift, and did you find that you had a lot of transferable skills already from your time in the military that helped you in that job?
Yes, I did actually, and because I was moving into what was a bit more military environment in a way. My boss was a retired Royal Marines Lieutenant Colonel. A lot of my colleagues were ex-military, and the residents that we were looking after were also obviously veterans as well. So back into that kind of, in terms of the people, there were people who I had a lot in common with. So
yes,
that was really helpful. I think because the majority of fundraising I did was trusts and grants fundraising, which is about, I guess in a way it's about analysing a problem, having a solution, and writing kind of staff documents and writing kind of well. That's something I had done, and in fact I remember a long time ago doing one of those. This was early days before AI, doing those kind of career matching, kind of what you could do with certain skills, and it actually said chartered engineers could be trust and grants fundraisers, and which is amazing. After I was already in the job, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But I think there are, in terms of being analysis, being analytical, and then putting together a case for support. There's a bit of a match there. Because I'd done recruiting for a couple of years, 2.5 years, we'd had marketing training and even sales training as recruiters.
Yeah.
Salesmen. There's a lot of crossover there. So I had done a business diploma as part of my resettlement. So I had done some marketing. So I did have some of those skills, and so I did, and actually I felt that it worked quite well, but just with my kind of my general attributes. So it went well, and the job developed really. So I became head of external relations, which was in many ways just a posher title, but it was a better description of what I was doing. Because I was doing a lot, liaising with external agencies and government, and as well as doing the fundraising, and also doing all the standard communication jobs, including getting the website and up and running, and doing the social media, and all these kind of things. As a one woman job, it was varied, which I really enjoy. Because I really do like having variety in my working life. And sometimes it was quite difficult as well. And there were times where there was difficult, particularly there were issues with the media. That we were looking after veterans with some really complex needs and some difficult circumstances. It doesn't always work out well. Sometimes things get into the media, so having to deal with that kind of dealing with negative media stories, that could be quite stressful and difficult at times, and challenging. And that's where the kind of resilience that I built up from my time in the armed forces, I think, was also very helpful.
So with everything that you've just been describing there, I can kind of see a theme and a trajectory towards where you've ended up now. You said you stayed for 14 years in that job. How did the job develop over time? Because, of course, marketing and communications, and you've mentioned things like social media and AI and all the rest of it, the world over the past 14 years, as communications has changed drastically. How did you find that throughout your time?
Yes, and I'm interested in these kind of things. I'm interested in developments in social media and things. So I remember, we were quite early adopters of having a Twitter account, as it was then, for example. I remember speaking to the board really early on about asking them to use their own Twitter accounts and Facebook accounts, and they were I think they were actually laughing at the time. They were laughing at the thought that anyone would have a Twitter account.
Yeah.
Because it was new, and that was definitely not for them. And I was, I was trying to persuade them, this is my job. This is the future. We will have to, and of course nowadays that's absolute second nature for trustees of charities to use their own social media profiles. But at the time it was that was all new. But I find that really interesting. And also, not long after I joined, the charity decided to open a third residence in Glasgow. So there was one in Edinburgh, one in Dundee. So pretty much, from the start when I arrived, I was planning for a major capital fundraising campaign and was very involved in that project from the days when it was just an idea being talked of in the boardroom to the day I first walked into the building in Glasgow and it had all been painted and it was all ready to go, and it was that was an incredibly emotional moment. And then arranging for the royal patron to do the opening, which again was part of my job, and these are always challenging occasions. I did manage to get a hover. I won't say a fly pass. It was a hover over by Seeking from HMS Gannet and Prestwick, because I knew some of the aircrew down there, so that was quite good.
Yeah,
as part of the day. So there were with a new project like that there was lots of challenge going on all the time. So so the role kind of did develop. I also took on data protection as part of my job at some point and was never able to get rid of it again. And then the Freedom of Information Scotland Act was then extended to registered social landlords in 2019, I think. So then that also became part of my job. So again, I was having to train myself in that, train others, write policies, and make sure that we were compliant with all those things. So there was a bit of compliance and regulatory work, as well as my comms and fundraising and marketing.
So how does the Scottish Veterans Commissioner job come into the equation for you, Susie? Was that something that you had thought that you would? Is this a sort of position that you thought that you would have liked in advance, or was it one of these things you were sitting in a room with someone and it happened to come up and you thought maybe I could have a go at that?
Yeah, the latter. Yeah, not at all. Wasn't something I'd thought. That's a role maybe for retired senior officers. That not for somebody who'd been out of the military for a long period of time and been working in the third sector. But yes, it was kind of suggested that maybe I should apply, and which I did, and I was quite surprised, but very pleased to be selected to take on the role. But actually, I think my experience in the third sector, so working with lots and lots of veterans, although veterans on the with complex higher needs, which is only a small proportion of the veterans population, was helpful. But also I knew lots of all the other different veterans organisations. I had good working relationships with them. I'd seen initiatives come and go in the whole veterans world, either charitable ones or government ones. So I had quite long experience of, as well as obviously my service experience and my transition experience. I had quite a long experience of what the veterans world was like, and that certainly was a very good preparation for this role.
Absolutely. Everything, your whole trajectory, it seemed to start pointing in this direction, and certainly moving into the communication side of things as well. It just seems like I'm not surprised that it came up. So let's talk about the last 3.5 years, because you are, to kind of fast forward a little bit, you're coming to the end of your post at the time of recording. We are now in April and you will be stepping down in September, is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
And so the past 3.5 years, let's start at the very beginning. What was it like to walk into this office for the first time and have that first stack of papers in front of you, and it's like, okay, Susie, time to crack on. You're now the Scottish Veterans Commissioner. What were you thinking?
Yes, I think everybody, well, a lot of people probably do have that bit of imposter syndrome when they take on a new role, and so I did have some self-doubt over whether this was something I would really be able to kind of do effectively. But I have a great team. So a great team of 3 civil servants who there's been some changeover from when I first arrived, but they're all fantastic actually. So that was really helpful. So I had a brilliant team there to support me. So that was great. And I found the veterans community and everybody I dealt with was incredibly welcoming. And there was lots and lots of invitations to meet people and do things, and the invitations to come and speak at events started right away. So it was absolutely there's nowhere to hide, to go straight in and start doing the job, which is the best way to do it. I think it's kind of the only way to do it, really, just to crack on and start doing it. And in fact, my team always used to say, "Don't worry, it'll quieten down." In a couple of months, and it never has.
It never did.
I'm still waiting for it to quieten down, because there was just a lot. There's always been more invitations to visit people, to do things than I can actually accept, considering it's a 2.5 day a week job. Yeah. So it was a bit daunting to start, and I was grateful to have the team there. But quite quickly, I think I got a feel for what I needed to focus on. I had to write a strategy when I first arrived, for the first 3 years. So I had to really do that first and think about where I wanted to focus on, what areas of policy I wanted to look at. And there's always a lot going on in the veterans world, and I think the pace of that has picked up as well. Yes. So there was the Office of Veterans Affairs for the first time, really. So there was at the time there was. We met every couple of months with the UK Veterans Minister. That's changed now, but that was happening at the time. So there was a lot of that kind of engagement going on, and there were some new initiatives with the Scottish Government as well. So there was quite a lot happening, and it's good to be around at the start of some of these things.
Yes,
and some of that's changed, but I think overall there is just more focus on veterans than there was 20 years ago. I think that's absolutely the case. When we didn't, the Armed Forces Covenant has been brought in. There are veterans policies. Every local authority in Scotland has veterans mentioned in various policies like housing. That just didn't used to be the case before. So there's a lot more focus, and that's so it's been good to be around while some of that has been coming to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in terms of you're had to write your strategy, had to decide obviously the parts of policy that you wanted to focus on. Do you feel like perhaps because you'd had so much experience working with veterans with complex needs, did you come into the job already with some ideas of how some policies or some change that could come into place to help that side of the veterans community, having worked in it for so long?
Well, I certainly felt I came in with a good understanding of what the more complex needs could be for veterans, but also, and this was something that I thought was important in my previous role, was to make it clear that most veterans are fine.
Yes.
Most veterans, in fact, are really net contributors. They're not looking for support. They're fundraising for our charities. They're helping out in their community. They're working. They're doing really well in their career. So most veterans are fine. And we were careful in SVR not to try and to push the message too hard, because we had the statistics on homelessness in the veteran population in Scotland, so we know that veterans are not actually more likely to be homeless than anyone else, and I already knew that. So I was conscious of that, and that was one of my strategic themes in my strategy, was to try and push back on stereotypes. Yes. And to try and emphasise the positive message of what veterans bring to our economy, to our communities, to the country as a whole. And that was definitely one of the lanes I wanted to be in terms of my strategy. And also the Scottish Government had their own veteran strategy, and that was, for me, that was key. In some areas that were in there, like housing and health, had been looked at really closely by our predecessors, but some areas like justice and finance hadn't really been looked at, and they were the government strategic themes. So I was very much, well, the government, you say you're doing these things, and it's my job to come and look and see if you are.
Yes.
Exactly. What are you doing, and is it working? So that helped as well in terms of forming what policy areas I would look at. And the other overarching themes that I had, one of them was also about the diversity of the veteran community. Just knowing that veterans can look like anyone. They can look like me. They can, they're not all old. I mean, the majority of them are older men, but they're not older men by any stretch, and they are can be from countries other than the UK, women, it can be LGBT plus, there are all sorts of people in the veteran community, and I wanted to make sure that was something that formed part of my strategy as well.
Yeah, I really love what you said about just that very simple phrase used, which is just, most veterans are fine. And I think that's what's always made you such a great friend of the Officers Association Scotland, for example, because our big ethos is, hiring veterans is great for business, and it is about changing public perceptions of the veteran community, that they are, as a group, mostly a hard up and find it difficult to come into civilian society, and that is just not the case. It's true what you said, about them being mostly net contributors and fantastic assets to any part of civilian life that they would choose to walk into, whether it's volunteering, like you said, but from the Officers Association Scotland's point of view, from employment, is that they are fantastic assets to our workforce, and you've always been a great advocate of that as well. And what would you say to any Scottish business that would perhaps get a CV, an ex-military CV on their desk? What would your advice be to them about considering that person as a candidate for hire?
Yeah, ex-military CVs can look different from other CVs, and sometimes even with, and it's definitely better now because there's more tools and there's better ways of, more help for people writing their CVs. But the language can be not what someone would be expecting. And I would always say, and have them in for interview, get to meet them, because nearly always a veteran's USP is themselves. It's their own character and personality, and you won't get that unless you meet them. And I've interviewed, I've looked at lots of CVs for jobs and interviewed quite a lot of people for jobs, as a manager, and I always, regardless of whether it's veterans or not, I always, err on the side of, if we're not sure, bring them in and let's meet them.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way really to tell what somebody's like, is to meet them. And I know hard-pressed hiring managers might not want to do extra interviews, but I would say particularly with veterans, if there's any, if people are meeting, looks like they're meeting essential criteria, bring them in, because you probably are in for a very pleasant surprise when you meet them.
Yeah, that's a fantastic message, and one that we can absolutely get behind. What piece of work have you done as Veterans Commissioner that you are most proud of, would you say?
I think I really enjoyed, and I'm quite proud of, the work I did on veterans in the justice system. And again, it's very important to say that service does not, from all the evidence we have, some of it is a bit incomplete, but service does not lead people to be more likely to be in the justice system. And so we know how many veterans are in prisons in Scotland. We know it's a small percentage. It's a lower percentage than there are veterans in the community, for example. But it was an unexamined issue, and I think being able to highlight it has led to improvements already, and continuing to see some of that improvement. And I'm really excited about some of the work. Some of it's being funded by the Scottish Government, some of it's been funded from other sources, but some of the work that's going ahead to perhaps support veterans while they are at first contact with the police or the justice system, and have that preventative work that maybe means that they end up going to prison, because that's really the worst outcome. People who go to prison tend to, there's a very high chance that they will reoffend and go back into prison. So trying to do that preventative work, I think there's real scope for work there. And I think more than perhaps civilian offenders, I don't know, it's difficult to sort of categorise people, but
Yes.
I think veterans have real potential for rehabilitation, because at one point they've been selected and trained as service people, and they've understood those rules, they've lived that life, and have been, had that very positive life as a service person. And so I think it, in many ways, being able to rehabilitate them back towards something like that must be more straightforward. And the more that can be done to prevent reoffending, the better that is for literally everybody, for the public purse, for potential victims, and for the veterans themselves. So I'm pleased that we've seen actually some progress as a result of some of that work. And also highlighting, I think, in the finance report, and something that is a real issue is that veterans and service people are at high risk of gambling harm. And that is, again, is something that's not really talked about very much, but I'm really pleased that now that is now a bit more out to the open. The Scottish Government has funded an organisation that specifically works with the armed forces and the veteran community in terms of supporting gambling harm. But I think one of the key things about these kind of issues is it needs to be talked about, and it needs to be acknowledged that this is a public health issue and an addiction. Something needs to be treated in that way, but also that kind of keeping quiet about it only exacerbates the problem. So people need to feel that they can be open and come forward for help if they are experiencing gambling harm. So that's something else that I'm pleased to see. I think that there's been some progress in that.
Yeah, fantastic. That's it's such a broad range of issues, isn't it? And to have to kind of take the mantle up for all of them, it must be really quite a daunting task. And to have seen tangible progress within the past 3 years it is something to be extremely proud of.
It's very encouraging to see some progress. 3.5 years is quite a short time period in terms of moving government policy. So some of the things that come into fruition now, for example, the Veterans Mental Health Pathway, is something that the first commissioner was advocating for, and it's taken much longer for that to come to the kind of fruition that it will now.
Yeah.
But it's also great to see that happening. So yes, it's good to see that there is some progress. And I'm the next bit of work I'm doing is a bit of work on employment, and I'm really pleased to see now more employers who absolutely understand that employing veterans is a good business decision for them. It's for their bottom line. It's not an act of altruism, and that's definitely, that message I think is getting through to more employers, and particularly larger employers. And I think there's more we can all do, and including employers themselves, in getting that message across. But I think I've seen change in the last 3.5 years, and I think that's moving in a positive direction.
So, it's April. September is coming close. Does it feel a little bit like you are going back into a resettlement journey?
Yes, it does feel a bit familiar. I haven't applied for many jobs over my whole career, really, or done many interviews, or I need to refresh my CV. And yes, it's going back to that decision time and thinking, well, what next, and where I can use all the knowledge that I've gained over the last 3.5 years, but also in my previous roles as well, and put that to good use in a way that's going to that'll work well for me and for my employer.
And a big question, but do you know what you would like to do next?
No, and again, this is, I guess, why it feels a bit familiar from when I was leaving the Navy and had to think about, well, am I going to stay with what I know, or am I going to look into a different lane? So I'd say not really is probably the answer there.
Yeah, it's not just about finding any old job, isn't it? It's about what is going to fulfill you next, and where do you want to go next, and what is going to get you up and make you feel like this is exactly how I want to spend the next part of my working life.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And having been through the experience of being in a job where I kind of got to the stage where I didn't really want to go to work in the morning, to being at SVR, which I did take, I took a considerable pay cut to go from oil and gas to the charitable sector, to a job where I loved going into work every day, and I stayed for 14 years. That's been a real learning point for me. You spend a lot of your time at work. You have to be doing something that. I was going to say sparks joy. Maybe that's going too far, but something that's really that's good for you, and that you find fulfilling. And that's a really key thing.
Well, I can only wish you all the very best in your next move. Everyone at the Officers Association Scotland, whatever it is that you do, I'm sure we will absolutely still work together and be asking you to speak at things as we do with people who are friends of ours. But we're just looking forward to seeing what you do next. Obviously, you've still got a couple of months in post, some great work to do. But for now, Susie Hamilton, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on From Combat Boots to Business Suits. One last thing before we go. Obviously, you're receiving your official branded mug, which is
right.
your gift to keep. And I'm
Thank
sure
you.
you'll have every cup of tea you'll ever have from now until the end of time in this mug. But I always end the podcast with the same question. And that is, we are called from combat boots to business suits. Which of these two things, combat boots or business suits, resonates the most with you?
Right. I mean, being in the Navy, I did have a pair of combat somewhere, but I tended to wear steaming boots, which is what you wear on board ship. Steaming bats, if you want to be precise. So I would say my identity is probably always going to be with my service life and being a veteran. Even though I've been out now for longer than I was in, I think that will never change.
Yeah. Susie Hamilton, thank you so much. And to everyone watching at home, I hope that you've enjoyed this amazing first episode to kick off season 2. Please have a subscribe wherever you get your podcast if you are listening or watching on video. And we will see you for the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jane.